atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. The atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place, fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. The atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Yeah, the atmosphere is changing now. Sing that out, church. For the Spirit of the Lord is here. Yeah. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place, fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Overflow in this place, fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. We're surrounded by your love. Yeah. We're surrounded by your love, Jesus. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, For the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here.
Your scars, you pulled me from the clay and set me on a rock and called me by your name. You made my heart whole again. Lift it up, and my knees know it's all for your glory. Pulled me from the clay and set me on a rock and called me by your name and made my heart whole again. So here I stand, high in surrender. I need you now. Hold my heart now and forever. My soul cries out. Once I was broken, but you love my whole heart through. Sin has no hold on me, 'cause your grace holds me now. And that grace holds the ground where the grave did, where all my shame remains, left for dead in your way. You crashed those age-old gates. You left no stone unturned. You stepped out of that grave, shouldered me all the way. Sing this out. So here I stand. So here I stand, high in surrender. I need you now. And hold my heart now and forever. My soul cries out. Once I was broken, but you love my whole heart through. Sin has no hold on me, 'cause your grace holds me now. Healed and forgiven, and look where my chains are now. Death has no hold on me, 'cause your grace holds that ground. Your grace holds me now. 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 Yeah. Let's sing out that chorus together. So here I stand, high in surrender. So here I stand, high in surrender. I need you now. Hold my heart now and forever. My soul cries out. So here I stand, high in surrender. I need you now. just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, and to know thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. God, thank you so much just for being in this place with us, God. I feel you, and we're so thankful for that grace, God, that unending grace, God, that no matter what we're feeling, no matter what we're doing, no matter what's going on in our lives, God, you love us and you're there, God. And I just pray that as TJ comes up, that you just use him as a vessel, God, to send what you have for us out into our hearts. God, I pray that we soak it up like a sponge, and that we don't just keep it for ourselves, God, that we share it with those around us, because it's too good to hold on to. It's too good to keep to ourselves, God. You are so great, and we are so blessed. In your name I pray, amen.
Well, good morning. Good to see everybody here today. So glad you're able to make it to one of the Sunday morning gatherings of Crossway Church. If you're new here and we haven't had the opportunity to meet, let me just take a moment and introduce myself. My name is TJ, and I'm the pastor here at Crossway, and I'm really, really glad that you're here. I know there are a lot of places you could be and a lot of different things you could be doing, but you came and gathered with us this morning, and man, I am so glad that you decided to come. We are kicking off a brand new series today entitled Blindsided, and what we're going to do for the next 4 weeks is we're going to talk about 4 different things that are just so sneaky. They make their way into our lives, and when they embed themselves in our lives, we end up doing things that we never thought we would do, and we end up becoming someone we just never thought we would become. And so we're going to talk about these 4 different things, and today I want to start off with a particular subject. But before I tell you what we're going to talk about, I want to tell you why I wanted to talk about this one first. I wanted to talk about this one first because I just believe that this is a pressure that every single one of us face almost every single day. As we go out into our world, we encounter messages and ideas and mentalities and philosophies that constantly tempt us to become this type of a person. Also, I want to talk about this first because it costs us so much. When we get involved in this thing, it robs us. It robs us of joy. It robs us of peace. It robs us of contentment. It robs us of a sense of security in life. And it also corrodes relationships. For some of you, the thing that we're going to talk about today, it explains why your marriage is in a rocky place. For some of us, the thing we're going to talk about today explains why you and your brother or your brother and sisters or your siblings, why you guys can't get along, why you can't even be in the same room without fighting. For some of you, this explains why you're at odds with your kids. For some of you, this will explain why your business partnerships are failing and eroding or have already failed. For many of you, maybe this will explain why your relationship with God is the way it is. For some of you, this might explain why you and God seem to be running down different tracks. But the other reason why I wanted to talk about this one and why I wanted to start with this particular subject today is because of all the things that I want to talk about over the next 4 weeks with you guys, this one is the most sneaky. It's so easy to get blindsided by this particular thing. It's possible for this to be true of you for years, even decades, and you not know it. In fact, as soon as I tell you what it is, because this is so sneaky, many of you, if not most of you, are going to come to the conclusion that I'm not talking about you. You're going to come to the conclusion that I'm talking about the person next to you, or I'm talking about the person in front of you, or I'm talking about the person behind you. And that's why I want to talk about this one first. The subject that I want to talk to you for a few minutes about this morning is greed, and how you and I can avoid being blindsided by greed. Jesus had some rather interesting words to say about this particular subject. So if you have your Bible or a Bible app on your mobile device, would you turn with me to Luke chapter 12? Luke chapter 12. If you don't have a Bible or a Bible app on your mobile device, don't worry about it. We're going to put all this stuff up on the screens for you so that you can follow along. We're going to start reading in verse 13, but before we start there, I want to give you a little bit of context to help you understand what's going on. Jesus has been standing up in front of a large crowd teaching all day long. There were somewhere about 1,000 or more people there that day, and over the course of the time that he's been teaching this group of people, he's covered some really heavy subjects. He's talked about heaven and hell, and he's talked about judgment, he's talked about forgiveness, he's talked about fear and anger and all these sort of things. And apparently, in the crowd there that day, there was a guy who had no intention whatsoever to learn from Jesus. He came to get something from Jesus, but it had nothing to do with what he thought that Jesus could teach him. So he sits there with the crowd for a while, and he waits, and he finds the moment when he feels like, okay, now's my time. And so he starts edging his way through the crowd. Excuse me, pardon me, I'm sorry, excuse me, I need to get down there, I need to talk to Jesus. And he gets down towards the front of the crowd where he's within talking distance from Jesus, and he waits until the moment is right. Maybe he waits until Jesus takes a breath and he kind of interjects, or maybe he waits until Jesus pauses a little bit longer. Maybe he's a little bit kinder than that and waits until Jesus is clearly done teaching what he was teaching. But he waits for the moment, and then in verse 13, here's what he says: "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, because we live in the 21st century world, this seems like a kind of strange thing for a person to do. In our world, it's considered rude if you interrupt somebody when they're talking. It's also considered rude if you interrupt somebody when they're teaching or preaching or whatever. And so it seems kind of strange to us, but this was commonplace in the first century world. Rabbis would stand up and they would teach, and as they were teaching, it was very common for people to ask questions, sort of interject, and then there would be this dialogue that would be started, and the teacher would teach not just through monologue, but also through dialogue. Also, it was very common in the first century world for people to go to rabbis to settle disputes for them. Rabbis were considered to be experts and authority figures, and so people would go to them to settle disputes. But normally when they came with a question. But this guy, he doesn't have a question. Instead of coming to Jesus with a question, he comes with a demand. He simply says, "Jesus, you tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now there's so much about what's going on that we don't know. We don't know this guy's name. We don't know how old he is. We don't know anything about his brother. We don't know anything about his parents, what happened to them, how long ago it happened to them. We don't even really know the nature of the dispute. We don't know if the issue is that he doesn't feel like his brother's sharing as much of the inheritance with him as he should. We don't know if the brother's outright refusing to share any of the inheritance. We don't know if the issue is that they're disputing over the particulars of the inheritance. Like, no, let's not sell mom and dad's house. The one thing we know for sure about this man in this situation is that this man will not rest, he will not relax until he gets what he feels like he is due. He is singularly focused on that. So in the next verse, Jesus responds and he says, "Man," and I want to kind of stop here because there's some interesting things that are happening in the Greek language. The word that's used here, "man," in the Greek carries the idea that Jesus is angry. He's literally ticked off about what he sees and what's happening. You could kind of translate this as Jesus saying, hey, knucklehead, listen up. Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? In other words, Jesus says, look, I'm not going to get involved in your petty family dispute. Now, instead of doing that, Jesus decides to address the issue behind the issue. The real issue that's in the middle of all this that maybe this guy and maybe everybody who's hearing this conversation is completely unaware of. So in the next verse we read, then he, talking about Jesus, said to them. So what Jesus is about to say is extremely important. And he doesn't want it to be just a private conversation between him and this guy. So he does everything he can to get as many people as possible to listen to what he's about to say. No doubt he got the disciples' attention. He goes, guys, I need you to focus in. I need you to pay attention. And guys, by the way, go make sure everybody in the crowd's paying attention too. I want everybody to hear this. And finally, when everybody calmed down and every eye was focused in and every ear was paying attention, Jesus issues one of the strongest warnings that he issues in the entire New Testament. And here's what he says, watch out. You can almost feel the intensity in Jesus' voice and how it comes across so strong. He wants people to know, guys, watch out. And I imagine he scans the crowd and maybe he sees somebody who didn't quite pay attention, who wasn't quite getting it, or maybe he sees blank looks on people's faces. So he goes in, he issues another warning. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Jesus tells them, and I think he's also telling us, you got to be careful when it comes to greed, because greed is sneaky. It flies under the radar, and it can be in our lives for years, undetected. He wants us to understand, look, here's the thing about greed. Greed is really difficult to diagnose, especially self-diagnose. So Jesus is urging us, please, don't get blindsided by this stuff. Now, the reason why Jesus is doing this is because he knows that there's something true about greed that you and I oftentimes miss. You see, Jesus ultimately knows that greed camouflages itself as virtue. Greed, by the very nature of what it is, it hides itself. It hides itself behind good-looking things and good-looking motives, and it looks like a good thing. Greed hides itself behind statements like this: I'm just trying to provide a good life for my kids and family. Nothing wrong with that. But greed sometimes uses this as an excuse. Sometimes it hides itself behind statements like this: look, I'm just trying to provide a better life for my kids than I had. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that greed sometimes uses that as a really good excuse. Sometimes it sounds like this: look, I'm just preparing or saving for the future. And there are Bible verses that encourage us to do this. This is a good and wise practice. But it's possible to be really good at saving and preparing and greedy. Sometimes it sounds like this: I don't want my kids to feel the financial burden of caring for me when I'm old. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a financial burden to my kids when I'm old. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that greed sometimes leverages that. Sometimes it hides behind that. It's why it's hard to detect. Sometimes it sounds like this: I'm going to keep or buy this because I might need it one day. Sometimes it sounds like this: I would loan blank to blank. Let's just say I would loan my lawnmower to my neighbor, but they won't take care of it. It's good to take care of things, but sometimes greed leverages that. Sometimes it leverages this: I worked hard for it, so I deserve it. Nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of our labor. But greed likes to hide behind that. So Jesus warns everybody strongly. He says, look, be careful. Watch out. Be on your guard. It's easy to get blindsided by this stuff because it always looks like something good. But lurking behind those good things is greed. Sometimes it's greed. And then Jesus follows up by saying this very interesting statement. He says, look, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Now that seems like kind of a no-duh statement, doesn't it? Like there's a part of me, at least, when I read that, I thought, well, Jesus, why even say that? It seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? I mean, do people, do they really think that's true? Like, do people actually live that way? Are there people who think that this life is about just an accumulation of really good things? There's at least one person out there, right? Because they have a bumper sticker that says, he who dies with the most toys wins. And the reason why Jesus has to say this is because we do this. Anytime you and I think money or possessions will bring us happiness, contentment, peace, or security, we are living as if our life consists in an abundance of possessions. If you got to have that truck because you think it'll make you happy, guess what you're doing? If you got to have that house because you think it'll make you happy and secure, guess what you're doing? So Jesus states it with absolute clarity because he doesn't want us to miss it. And then, because he wants to underscore what he's trying to say here, Jesus pulls a total Jesus move and he decides to tell a parable or a story. And here's what he says. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So Jesus' story starts out with a guy, and we don't have a lot of information. We know he's a farmer. We know that he's rich, and so he's probably a good farmer. He's probably gifted. He probably knows what he's doing. He's probably a leader. He's probably even a visionary. And one year he goes out and he does his thing. He works really, really hard, and he gets a bumper crop. He gets the bumper crop of a lifetime, which leaves him with a dilemma. So in the next verse we read, he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Translation, here's what the guy's saying. Here's what the question he's wrestling with is. What should I do with all the money that I earned? What should I do with all my money that I got because of my hard work? Now, the strange thing about his question is that he overlooks the obvious. See, and everybody in this day and age would have seen it. But because we don't live in primarily an agrarian culture, we sometimes miss this. But farmers are always at the mercy of things that they cannot control. Sun, wind, rain, insects, disease. This man has totally failed to realize that he's far more dependent upon God than he ever imagined. He's totally lost sight of the fact that he lives in a world that was created by God. And the very pieces of land that he farms were given to him by God. He fails to realize that his abilities, his talent, his farming capacity, his business savvy, his leadership excellence, that all of that was a gift from God. He failed to realize that there were elements that were beyond his control, that God oriented so he could have what he had. He even forgot that the very breath that he sucks into his lungs was given to him by God. And because he failed to realize that it was God who gave him this stuff in the first place, and that God might actually have an intention, something he intended for this guy to do with it, he failed to ask a question that all greedy people fail to ask themselves. He failed to ask himself this question: why did God provide me with more than I need? All greedy people fail to ask this question. If you've never asked this question, or if you don't ask yourself this question on a regular basis, or a question something like this, chances are, and I don't mean it mean, but you might be greedy. It never once occurred to him that this wasn't all for his personal consumption. He just assumed that his lifestyle and his income should match. Something we assume too. The story continues. Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain." Next verse, "And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." So his big plan is essentially this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to build bigger barns. I'm going to tear down those smaller ones. I'm going to build bigger ones. I'll call my architect. We'll get the thing started today. And then once it's all done and everything's stored in there, my barn's in place, then I'm just going to live life on my terms. I'm going to go do what I want to do. If I want to go to the game, I'm going to go to the game. If I want to go golfing, I'm going to go golfing. If I want to go camping, I'm going to go camping. If I want to buy an RV and travel the country, I'm just going to live life on my terms, however I want. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that if this man's story were to stop here, we would consider him to be a role model. If he were doing seminars, we'd sign up for it. If he were writing books, we'd go read it. We'd talk endlessly about this man's business savvy and how he just had an eye for the market and he saw opportunities when they showed up. We'd talk about his leadership and how he was an incredible leader with his team and he rallied them around a common purpose and they had these values that drove them. They were incredible values and he helped his team to achieve uncommon results. We would talk about what a visionary he was, about how most farmers were content to just farm one field and do it okay. But this guy, he had much bigger, much grander vision. And it was so compelling that people got on board. We would talk about his farming techniques and what he did and how he was good at it. And farmers would consult with him. We consider this guy to be a role model. If his story ended here. But it doesn't. And really, neither does ours. So he goes that afternoon, I imagine, to go visit with the architect. And they have a really good meeting, and he leaves that meeting excited about that new barn that's about to be built. And that night sometime, as he was getting ready for bed, God delivered some rather startling news to this guy. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you." God calls him a fool. It's pretty strong. I think it's worth noting that God didn't call him a shady business dealer. He didn't call him a tyrant for a boss. He didn't call him abusive, manipulative, or even a sinner. He's the good guy who was a fool. And the reason why he was a fool was because he was wise enough to think about his future. He just didn't think far enough into his future. And because he didn't think far enough into his future, he assumed that all of it was for his personal consumption and his lifestyle matched his income. And then God asks a rhetorical question. Then, who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And the answer is obvious, isn't it? Somebody else. Somebody else. And what's true of the farmer is true of us too. I don't know if you've noticed, but the mortality rate hovers right around 100%. Like, I hate to break it to you, but none of us make it out of this thing alive. And one day, somebody else will get our stuff. The farmer didn't realize it, but he had a choice. He had the choice to give his stuff away while he still had time, or it would be taken away when time ran out. It's a choice you and I have too. We either give it away now while we still have time, or it gets taken away one day when time runs out. So then Jesus follows up this incredible story with a statement that for most of us in this room should be somewhat unsettling. Here's what he says. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. When Jesus talks about not being rich towards God, he's saying not being rich towards God's causes in this world. The work of building God's kingdom in our world. Now, what you see here is Jesus' definition of greed. If you were to ask Jesus, how would you define greed? He would say, well, it's someone who stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. I mentioned earlier that Jesus is making an unsettling statement here, and this is the unsettling statement. The definition itself should be somewhat unsettling for you, because what Jesus does here is he defines greed in the broadest possible terms. We're used to a very narrow definition of greed. Most of us don't think we're greedy, do we? In fact, I've only personally met one person my entire life who's been honest enough to look at me and say, TJ, I just struggle with greed. That's my thing. You see, most of us don't think we're greedy, and the reason why we don't think we're greedy is because we believe that's what rich people are. Rich people are the ones who could be greedy, and since we don't think about ourselves as rich because we all know somebody who has more money than we do, we don't think this applies to us. But Jesus says, oh, no. See, you think greed has to do with finances. Greed, Jesus insists, it actually has to do with your heart. So it's possible to be poor and greedy, it's possible to be rich and greedy, and it's possible to be middle class and greedy. All of us struggle with this heart issue. No matter where we fall on the socioeconomic scale. Now, what exactly did Jesus mean, do you think, when he says, this is how it will be? What does that mean? Does it mean that Jesus is saying, look, if we are greedy, if we spend our life storing up things for ourselves, but we're not rich towards God-oriented causes in this world, does it mean that we're going to die like the farmer in the story? Well, no, I don't really think that's what Jesus meant. I think what Jesus is referring to here is loss. When you think about it, this rich farmer stored up a whole bunch of stuff, and then when he died, somebody else got his toys. And then when he stepped into the next life, he had nothing to show for the previous one. Total loss. And that's how it'll be for you and me if we get blindsided by greed. If we spend this life storing up things for ourselves, but we're not rich towards God. So how do you and I overcome this stuff? How do we make sure, since it's so sneaky and it can live there for a long time in our heart with us without us even knowing it, how do we make sure that we don't give into this stuff? How do we make sure that we self-diagnose or we address the issue correctly? Well, thankfully, it comes down to just a few habits that in my final moments with you this morning, I'd like to share with you. And I want to kind of tell you that before I share with you these three habits, they're all powerful. The first two are powerful, but they're not nearly as important as the third one. In fact, you can practice the first two habits and not practice the third one, and you will still end up greedy. But they're all important habits, okay? Here's the first one. Here's how we overcome greed. We make a habit of being grateful. You know, greed by its very nature focuses our attention on what we don't have. We look around at what we don't have and we come to the conclusion that what we do have isn't enough. And so we get on this endless pursuit of more and more and more and more. And the crazy thing is that greed is an appetite that is never fully or finally satisfied. So we find ourselves in this cycle where we pursue, more. There's never enough. And what the beauty of gratitude is simply this. It takes our attention off of what we don't have and it zeroes our attention in on what we do. And as we start to pay attention to what we do have, we start to realize that we're more dependent on God than we had ever imagined. And we start to realize, wow, God's been far better to me than I ever realized. Gratitude, the habit of gratitude is so important. The people that I know that do this best have something called a gratitude journal. And what they do is they have a piece of paper, or a pad of paper rather, and at the end of the night, they'll sit down and they'll just simply write until they can't remember anymore about all the things that happened that day that they have to be grateful for. Things that just pop up into their head. And they just write until they're done writing. And over time, what those folks discover is what they have is more than enough. And if you'll practice gratitude, I can guarantee, as a habit, if you'll do it as a habit, I can guarantee the same thing will happen to you too. It's hard to become greedy when you're so grateful for what you have. Here's another habit we need to get into if we're going to overcome greed. We need to have a plan for our money and we need to stick to it. For some of you, maybe the most important thing you can do to help you overcome greed is to actually get your financial house in order. It's not greedy or greed to have a plan for how much you're going to save and how much you're going to spend and what you're going to spend on it. And it's not greedy to have a plan for what you're going to give. In fact, what I would argue is that when you have a plan, or what we sometimes call a budget, and I know for some of you that's a 4-letter word, but that's what I'm talking about. When you have a plan for your money, you become less, not more, but less susceptible to the impulses of greed in your life. If you're going to overcome slavery to money, you need to make sure that you're managing your money and your money isn't managing you. If you don't have a plan or a budget, your money is managing you, and here's what I can promise. It will move you towards greed every single time. When money manages us, it doesn't move us towards generosity and it doesn't move us towards selflessness. It makes us selfish and greedy. So maybe some of you just need to get your financial house in order and have a plan. Put together a budget that revolves around God's priorities and just stick to it. Which brings me to the third habit that is so stinking important. In fact, if you don't practice you practice these other two perfectly, but you don't do this, you will be greedy. And here's the third habit: generous giving. Generosity is the healthy habit that breaks us free from the grip of greed. It's the thing that pries the grip, the fingers of greed from our throats and from our hearts. And because of that, I think every one of us need to give and give generously. Even if you don't think you have extra or anything to give, you need to give anyway. In fact, you need to give until it causes you to have to change your lifestyle somewhat. And here's what I want you to know. If you're not giving to the point where it causes you to adjust your lifestyle, according to Jesus, you're greedy. If you're spending so much you don't have money to give, you're greedy. If you're saving so much that you don't have money to give, you're greedy. And I know that sounds harsh. Trust me, I don't mean it mean, but it's true. And I wouldn't actually love you if I didn't tell you that. If your giving is not causing you to alter your lifestyle somehow, You're a greedy person. I love you, but you're greedy. Now, for some of you, this is blowing your mind because you maybe have never had a greedy thought or a greedy feeling in your entire life. When you see somebody in need, or you see God's causes in this world going underfunded or under-resourced or whatever it is, there's a part of your heart that breaks and you feel this immense compassion. So this thing where I'm telling you that you might be greedy if you're not getting to the point where you alter your lifestyle is probably blowing your mind, and I get it. But here's what I want you to know. Greed is not a feeling. Greed is the decision not to act. It's entirely possible to feel immense amounts of compassion for people who are in need. It's entirely possible for your heart to break with the needs around you and still at the same time be greedy. Because greedy is primarily an action or an inaction. It's not a feeling. Our feelings are not the measuring stick. So because of that, we need to get in the habit of giving generously. And I think, this is just my opinion, but I think that the best way for you to do this is just to become a percentage giver. The way percentage giving works is that before you ever get paid, you decide between you and your spouse or whatever that you're going to give away a certain percentage of what you make to God-oriented causes in this world. And then when you get paid, the first thing you do is you give the money away. My wife and I have been doing percentage giving the entire 18 years that we've been married. And over the course of 18 years, we've given to all kinds of God-oriented causes in this world. Right now, we're giving over 10% of our income back to Crossway Church because we believe God's doing incredible things here. And we believe in Crossway Church. We also give a certain percentage of our income to the CPC in town because we believe they do God-oriented work in our community. We also give a certain percentage of our income to Compassion International to support a little boy named Wilmer who lives in Guatemala. And because of our percentage giving, Wilmer is going to have an education, he's going to have clothes, he's going to have food, he's going to have health care, he's going to have opportunity, and probably end up giving his life to Jesus Christ. My wife and I have never regretted a singular moment or a singular penny that we have given away as a percentage giver. In the New Testament, they did this too. What they would do is they would take a percentage of their income and they would take it to their place of worship, or they would give it to the needy. Nowadays, there are so many different options. There's so many great organizations that are doing God's work in this world. Pick one, pick two, pick three, and just start and do it. Get in the habit of being a generous giver. And if this whole thought and this idea scares you, start small. Start at 2% of your income. If you were to take 2% of your income and give it away, I can almost guarantee you won't even miss it. 2 pennies for every dollar. And then just decide next year we're going to go to 3%. And the year after that, we're going to go to 4%. And the year after that, we're going to go to 5%. And do that until you get to where you're giving away between 10 and 15% of your income. And when you get to that place, I guarantee you are having to adjust your lifestyle in order to be generous. And the chances of you being greedy at that point are very slim. You know, I've met a lot of people in my life, but I've never heard anybody say when I met them, you know, I want to become a greedy person. Nobody says that. I've met some terrible people, and even they didn't say that. But we end up becoming greedy anyway. It's so easy to get blindsided by it. So practice gratitude. Have a plan for your money and stick to it. And become a generous giver. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for the hard reminder that without even wanting to, with intentions sometimes that are totally different, that we can become greedy people. God, we know that the example that you set was one of giving. Lord, you've given so much to us. You weren't greedy with a single thing when it came to us. And so, God, I pray that we wouldn't be greedy either. I pray that you'd help us, Lord, to follow your example, Lord. And as we said earlier, this greed thing is so tricky, God. It's so easy to miss when it's in our lives and it's gripped our hearts. So, God, if we really are greedy, I pray that you would shine a light on that in our life. I pray that you'd cause us to stare the cold, hard truth in the face. And then, God, I pray that you'd help us to take courageous, disciplined action to address it. God, I pray that you'd teach us how to be grateful. That you'd teach us how to orient our money and have a plan for it and stick to it in a way that honors you. And God, more than anything, I pray that you'd help us to get in the habit of being generous givers. God, don't let us get blindsided by greed. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Would you all stand with us? promised and it won't stop now. I know a breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. Let's sing out this chorus together, church. Your presence is an open door. Yeah. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before.
You guys can be seated. As TJ was talking, I couldn't help but think about that show, Hoarders. Have you guys ever seen that? Yeah, it's appalling, isn't it? The things that people keep and actually how it weighs down their life and causes dysfunction in their life. You know, we watch them for fun and entertainment, and we're like, but we are spiritual hoarders sometimes, aren't we? And I think that it's equally appalling. Man, I felt cringy for that guy that was used as a public object lesson by Jesus. I thought, ooh, I don't want that to be me. But you know, guys, I can't help but think about Jesus and the fact that he came not mindful of what he would get, but what he had to give. And maybe sometimes we feel like, well, at least I'm more generous than so-and-so or so-and-so, but that's not our standard. Jesus is our standard, and we are Jesus followers, so we have to live like Jesus lived. And you know, he held nothing back, nothing. So as you're thinking about generosity, of course it's finances, but it's also time, it's also energy, it's also love, it's also relationships and the people in our life, right? We can tend to want to hoard all of those things, and they were entrusted to us to distribute, right? We're actually going to have our ushers come up now, and we're going to give you guys another opportunity to worship in giving. And I really want you to understand that this is an opportunity to worship. You guys can begin to pass the buckets. Because if you go back, I got curious, and I was looking at where did tithing start? When did that begin? And it began under the Old Covenant. And this phrase stood out to me as I was reading Deuteronomy chapter 14. It said, "This has been done so that you will learn to revere the Lord always." Not because God needed the money, but it was for our hearts. We need to give. He knew that would remind us always to keep him in his place. I researched, what does it mean to revere? Because that's an unusual word that we don't use. And to revere means to cherish, to treasure something, to hold it in high esteem. And so just as when we sing and just as when we serve, when we give, we are cherishing God. And we are reminding our hearts over and again the importance of doing so. You know, another way that we cherish God is done in community, as we grow with others together in maturity, right? And in pursuit of him. And so we have something exciting coming up because we have our fall groups are beginning September 8th. And you should have got, that's right. You should have got a brochure, a listing of all the small groups that are going to be starting. And there's a small group for everybody. The options are amazing. I looked over them and I was impressed. So you have no excuse not to join a group, but more importantly, I want you to know that the reason we want you to join a group is because we value family. We are a family here at Crossway Church, and as a family, we're a family that's devoted to God because we're his family. And you get that sense of family and community on a smaller level when you join a small group. So these groups have limited space,
So I would encourage you to go and register today so that you can be a part of the one that you want to be a part of. You can register by going to one of the info centers. You can register at one of the kiosks that are located outside in the lobbies. You can also register online at crossway.news under the groups tab. Maybe as TJ was talking, or at any point in the service, you found that there was something pressing on your heart. There was something weighing there that you need to talk with somebody, or there's something going on in your life that you need prayer for. And you know, that is what family is here for. And we have our sanctuary broken up into 4 sections, and each section has a leader. And so that leader is here because they want to be there for you. They want to give you care. And so if you have those questions or need prayers, they're going to be in the back waiting for you, just for whatever it is that you need. So I encourage you to go talk with them. And next week, actually, we are going to be continuing the Blindsided series, part 2. You guys aren't going to want to miss it because I can see that this is a purifying of the heart process, you know? So this is my challenge to you. You all meet us back here, same time, same place. Deal? Deal. All right, we'll see you then. Love you guys.